Fuck you, Trump. The words didn't echo. They detonated. Inside the U.S. Capitol, under 5 layers of security, one woman just told the sitting president to go to hell, live, before 327 million Americans. The camera didn't cut, the microphone didn't mute, and the president didn't blink. But his knuckles turned white. What followed wasn't a scandal. It was a collapse. 3 intelligence memos, 2 sealed DNA reports, and a classified financial wire traced $2.3 billion from Beijing to a Florida trust fund. And at the center of it all, not Russia, not Iran, Eric Trump. That day, democracy didn't tremble. It drew its sword, and the blade was sharpened the night before. The lights inside the Capitol were still on long after the reporters had gone home, and the last senator had slipped into a chauffeured black SUV. On the 3rd floor of the Rayburn building, one window still glowed, a solitary amber rectangle amid a skyline cloaked in political fog. Inside, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat alone, her blazer draped on the chair beside her, sleeves rolled, fingers stained with highlighter ink and cold sweat. 4 thick folders lay open on the table in front of her own. Not from anonymous leakers, not from whistleblowers or hacked clouds, but from the marrow of the system itself. Government stamped, signed, sealed, and buried in restricted access for over 2 decades. The kind of documents that don't disappear because someone forgets, but because someone orders them to. Each file had a code name: Blue Dragon, Paternal Shadow, Raven Gate. She hadn't touched the 4th one yet. She was saving it for last. The clock read 11:07 p.m. A half-empty cup of bitter coffee sat next to her left hand. Next to her right, a single sticky note, handwritten, underlined twice in red, "Make them say it on live TV." She stared at it like it was a final exam question. Across the hall, the cleaning crew had paused vacuuming. They sensed something in the air, something not yet spoken but undeniable. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. For a brief second, the weariness tried to creep in. Her legs ached, her eyes burned, her heart threatened to pound through her ribs. What she was about to do wasn't politics. It was something older, something raw, closer to reckoning than rhetoric. She had read everything, line by line, signature by signature. A DNA report dated March 3, 2002, from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, a wire transfer statement from the Bank of China, encrypted under U.S. shell corporations tied to Eric Trump's asset trust. A photograph of Ivana Trump, 1993, standing on a tarmac in Guangzhou, next to a man in uniform, Mok Thien Hao, former deputy of China's 2nd Department of Military Intelligence. The connections weren't blurry, they were surgical. Jasmine whispered to the empty room, "He lied to the entire country for decades, and they protected him. Every damn one of them. Damn one." Well, there was a reason this hadn't surfaced during Trump's first presidency. A reason no one dared dig too deep in 2016 or 2020, or even when January 6th shook the nation like a cracked bell. The truth wasn't just explosive, it was nuclear, and no one wanted to hold it when it went off. But Jasmine Crockett was done playing by their rules. She reached for her phone, not hesitating now, not debating consequences, not fearing backlash. There were moments in history that didn't ask for permission. They demanded action. This was one of them. She dialed the congressional broadcast liaison. The voice on the other end sounded half asleep. "Congresswoman Crockett?" Her voice didn't waver. Full transmission, no delay, no filter, public session. I waived my right to a closed hearing. A pause, then. "You're requesting live coverage of a presidential hearing?" "No." Jasmine stood. She pulled her hair back, clipped it tightly, and looked at herself in the glass reflection. Eyes hard as carved obsidian. "I'm requesting open war." She hung up. There was no silence after that, only the hum of electricity. The walls knew. The floorboards held their breath. In the drawer below her desk was a hard drive, secured inside a steel case. On it were copies of the documents, facial recognition analysis, location metadata, even a heat map overlay from 1993 satellite surveillance. Jasmine didn't trust firewalls. She didn't trust Congress. She barely trusted the locks on her own office. So she made 12 duplicates and mailed them. One to a federal judge in Vermont, one to a journalist she knew would never sell out, and one to her childhood pastor in Houston. If she didn't make it through tomorrow, the truth still would. She took one last look at folder 4. The title read, Eric, Bio-Orphan Protocol. It was time. Jasmine closed the file, rose from her chair, and walked to the window. Below her, Washington, D.C. breathed in the kind of quiet that only comes before something irreversible. She pressed her hand to the glass. For every lie you buried, she whispered to no one in particular, I'll bury your legacy. Behind her, the Capitol clock struck midnight, and in exactly 9 hours, Jasmine Crockett would walk into a congressional hearing, look the most powerful man in the world in the eye, and ask him a question no one had dared speak aloud on record. Who is Eric Trump? Now it was 8:59 a.m. The moment had arrived. The chamber wasn't just full, it was pressurized. Every seat taken, every wall lined with standing bodies. Dozens of aides, analysts, interns, journalists, and operatives filled the Javian floor like oxygen before combustion. 9 cameras from 9 of the most powerful networks in the world rotated in mechanical silence, tracking every blink, every breath, every syllable yet to be spoken. You could hear leather shift, paper resist, hearts stall, a murmur pass through the back row, then a rustle of movement, heavy, deliberate, announced the arrival of the man himself. Donald J. Trump stepped through the arched mahogany doorway like a specter made of steel and spite. He didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't even glance toward the press pool. His face was carved from frost, unreadable and unrelenting. He wore the same trademark navy suit, red tie slightly loose, flag pin glinting under the dome lights. But there was a weight in his walk today, a tightness in the jaw, a slower shoulder roll, like a man entering the lion's den after realizing the lions were watching this time. He took his seat without a word. Across from him stood Jasmine Crockett. She was already there, waiting. Not seated, not leaning, not distracted. She stood like a blade unsheathed, perfectly still, perfectly ready. No aide behind her, no lawyer by her side, no folders, no laptop, no printed talking points. Just a black pen in her right hand, a closed fist in her left, and a memory train to kill. Trump glanced up. Their eyes locked. 2 nations collided in one silent second. Then Jasmine spoke. I am not here, she said, voice clear and razor sharp, to question the President of the United States. Every camera zoomed in. I am here to prosecute him before the people he swore to serve. The room did not erupt. It didn't have to. The tension in the air was too thick to slice with 1,000 scalpels. One network executive watching from New York whispered off camera, Jesus Christ, we're airing history. Trump leaned back in his chair just slightly. The faintest twitch crossed his temple. Not fear, not quite anger. Something colder. Calculation. The chair recognized the congresswoman from Texas and gave her the floor. Jasmine stepped forward, 1 pace. That was all she needed. For 30 years, she began, the American people have been fed a family myth, a billionaire's narrative, a son, a legacy, a dynasty. But myths are only safe when no one dares test the evidence. I have tested it, and today I will dismantle it under oath, under guichet, and under full public record. The pen tapped once against the desk. The sound echoed like a rifle crack. She turned to Trump, her tone almost surgical. Mr. President, do you affirm under penalty of perjury that Eric Trump is your biological son? A single beat of silence. Trump looked at her, eyes narrowed. What kind of question is that? Of course he is. That's absurd. You are wasting this chamber's time. I'll remind you, sir, Jasmine cut in, that lying to Congress is not protected under executive privilege, nor is lying to the American people, once the evidence has been made public. And that will happen today. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly. You're grandstanding. No, Jasmine said. I'm excavating. Gasps rippled through the gallery, but Jasmine didn't acknowledge them. She held up a single photograph. No caption, no context, just a woman, Ivana Trump, on a rain-slicked tarmac, 1993, stepping off a Gulfstream jet beside a man in uniform, face partly obscured by fog, but not obscured enough. Mak Thien Hao, former deputy director, Chinese military intelligence, 2PLA. Trump's face did not move, but his knuckles tensed. Jasmine laid the photo flat. You said your son was born in New York, that this trip never happened, but the customs entry log says otherwise. The flight records from Macau say otherwise. The hotel registry in Guangzhou says otherwise. She leaned forward, lowering her voice by a fraction. So I'll ask again, not as a Democrat, not as a prosecutor, but as an American citizen who's watched your lies fracture this country for far too long. Who is Eric Trump? No response. Only silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary occurred. Not outrage, not denial, not even deflection, but hesitation. The world saw it. The cameras caught it. And in that frozen heartbeat of hesitation, Jasmine knew she had landed the first blow. The war had begun. She didn't give him time to retreat. That pause, the glint of doubt in his eyes, the tightening in his shoulders, was all she needed to thrust the blade deeper. Mr. President, Jasmine said, her tone sharp but contained, like a scalpel before the incision. Let me ask you this plainly, and on the record, do you affirm under oath that Eric Trump is your biological son? Trump blinked once, just once. His face reset like a mask snapping into place. Of course I do, he said, loud enough for the microphones. Eric is my son, my blood, my legacy. What kind of disgusting question is that? There was a faint shuffle of discomfort across the room, but Jasmine didn't blink. Then explain this, she said, and pulled the first folder from beneath her hand. She opened it, not for effect, not for drama, but as one might open a wound, and withdrew a single cream-colored sheet. She held it with both hands. Steady, visible, deadly. This, she said, is Eric Trump's original birth certificate, filed March 13, 1980 at the People's Hospital of Guangzhou, certified by the U.S. Consulate in Beijing, recertified by the Department of State under Sealed Order 92 FI Delta. She stepped forward and placed it on the desk between them. It names the mother as Ivana Marie Trump, no surprise there, but the father, Jasmine let the sentence hang like the blade of a guillotine mid-fall. The father is listed as Mak Thien Hao, Lieutenant General, 2nd Bureau of Military Intelligence, People's Liberation Army. The chamber didn't gasp. It inhaled, sharply, collectively, as though trying to swallow what could not be digested. Jasmine didn't move. Her voice remained low, controlled, not theatrical, not accusatory, just inevitable. Now you can call it fake. You can call it doctored. You can call it a fabrication from some deep state fantasy, she said, still standing, still looking him straight in the eyes. But this document has been verified by both the U.S. Embassy and the Office of Diplomatic Archives. It is legally admissible, and it matches the signature on 3 other sealed forms tied to your ex-wife's international travel records from 1980 to 1985. Trump reached forward slowly, brushing the edge of the paper with 2 fingers as if it might burn. He didn't speak, his mouth open, then closed. You want to talk legacy? Jasmine asked, voice rising just enough to fill the room. You want to talk dynasty? Then let's talk about why the name of a top-ranking Chinese intelligence official is on the birth certificate of the man who sits on the board of your financial empire. She let the question hang, let the silence rot. Trump looked to the chairman. Are we seriously entertaining this circus? This is character assassination. No, the Jasmine cut him off. This is national security. She turned toward the room now, slowly, addressing everyone watching. inside and beyond. The man seated across from me holds the nuclear codes. He signs trade agreements. He appoints judges. And yet, there is mounting evidence that his direct heir, the face of the Trump organization, may have been born under a different flag to a different father, under circumstances the American people were never told and never allowed to question. Trump slammed his fist down on the table, not hard but loud enough to punch the tension in the room. "Enough," he barked. "I'm not going to sit here and let this woman, this partisan nobody, lecture me about my own damn family." "Then stand," Jasmine replied instantly, ease in her voice, fire behind her eyes. "Stand, Mr. President, and explain to the American people why the original documents contradict 30 years of your narrative." No one moved, no one breathed. Even the cameramen behind their lenses had stopped blinking. Jasmine reached into the folder again. This time she pulled out a black and white photo. It was old, grainy, but unmistakable. It showed Ivana Trump disembarking a private Gulfstream jet on a foggy tarmac in Guangzhou. Beside her stood a tall man in military dress. His cap obscured part of his face, but the insignia on his collar was unmistakable. A golden star, a red phoenix, People's Liberation Army. She placed it gently beside the birth certificate. "The date, January 4th, 1984, she said. "The flight, registered under a Hong Kong shell corporation connected to Tian Hao Enterprises. The man, Mok Thien Hao." Trump stared at the photo. Something in his expression cracked. Barely, but enough. Not fear, not guilt, just recognition. "Would you like to tell the chamber, sir?" Jasmine said softly now, voice almost a whisper. "Why Ivana took a covert, undocumented trip to China 6 weeks before Eric's birth?" Trump didn't answer. He couldn't. And in the stillness that followed, Jasmine Crockett took a step back, folded her hands behind her, and said what no one else in the room dared to. "This is the first cut," she said, "and I haven't even begun to dig." There was no breath drawn before the second blow. She reached calmly into the next folder. This one bore no dramatic stamp, no color-coded security warnings. It was plain, black-tabbed, almost unremarkable, until she opened it. "If Bloodline raises concern," Jasmine began, "then perhaps billions of dollars should raise alarms." Trump's head tilted, just slightly, the way a man does when something foreign enters his airspace. Jasmine continued, "According to financial disclosures filed with the U.S. Treasury and flagged by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, documents I subpoenaed last week, Eric Trump is the beneficiary of 3 offshore trusts, one in Guangzhou, one in Shanghai, and one in Taipei." She let that settle slowly, deliberately. The combined assets of these trusts exceed $2.1 billion. The silence was not as stunned as before. It was more dangerous now. Heavy, reactive. The way silence gets before someone throws a chair through a window. Trump's hand moved toward his microphone, but Jasmine was already ahead of him. "These trusts," she said, laying 3 translated statements across the table, "have each made substantial investments in a surveillance technology firm called Junwave Systems, headquartered in Hong Kong, but with a U.S. defense contract that went live 3 months ago." She flipped one of the statements over. It showed the company's acquisition chain. Arrows, shells, arrows, foundations, arrows. At the center, Junwave Systems, majority owned by the Eric M. Trump Development Trust, Guangzhou Division. "And what does Junwave produce?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew. Everyone in the room already knew. She didn't wait for the answer. She gave it. "Military-grade surveillance software, motion tracking, biometric profiling, encrypted payload scanners. The kind of technology used to monitor U.S. personnel on foreign bases, and as of this fiscal quarter, being integrated into security infrastructure within the Pentagon's own internal grid." A visible shift rippled through the room. Staffers stiffened. 2 senators whispered behind their hands. One aide rose, walked straight to the back, and made a call with the quiet urgency of a man watching the ground tilt. Trump erupted. "That's enough," he bellowed, slamming his hand against the polished wood, Damn it, that's enough. This is a lie. This is a setup. You're using fake intel to smear my son in front of the whole world. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned toward him, eyes fixed like a blade on a whetstone. I am using your own filings, she said. The same filings your campaign accountants submitted in 2023. The same trusts your lawyers tried to reroute through Belize before the audit hit. You thought nobody would follow the money because the name on the paperwork wasn't Donald. She leaned forward slightly, and now, for the first time, there was fire in her tone. But you forget, Mr. President, national security doesn't stop at your family tree. It begins there. Trump stood now, half rising from his chair, pointing across the table. You have no right to expose my son like this. No right to drag him through this theater. This is personal, and you know it. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. She lifted one hand and pointed directly at him. Not like a politician pointing for emphasis, but like a surgeon identifying the tumor. I have every right, she said, when your son's name is on the ownership ledger of a surveillance company installing software inside the walls of the U.S. Department of Defense. The room was frozen. One staffer coughed but immediately regretted it. Jasmine opened one final document, a contract, with a seal, with signatures. This, she said, is the agreement between Junwave Systems and the Department of Defense. It was co-signed by a man listed as E.M. Tanner, a name traced back to an alias used by Eric Trump on 3 separate property filings in Macau in 2012, 2014, and again in 2018. She looked directly at the chairman now. I am submitting this into the official congressional record. The chairman nodded slowly, not looking at Trump. There was a crack forming behind the president's eyes now. Not anger, not even panic. It was the look of a man beginning to realize that the armor he'd worn for decades, legacy, wealth, nationalism, was rusted through and the blade had already entered. Jasmine returned her gaze to him, and now her voice was almost gentle. You can scream conspiracy. You can say it's politics. But when billions of dollars move through the Chinese banks, and the end result is foreign-coded software guarding America's nuclear blueprints, what we have isn't slander. She paused just enough to let the nation breathe. It's treason dressed in a suit. Trump didn't sit. He couldn't. And Jasmine, still standing, still calm, still perfectly in control, gathered her folders and said the last line of the morning session before recess was called, "This was the second cut. There's one more to go." The afternoon session began under different weather. Not outside, inside. The oxygen in the room had changed. Confidence had drained from some faces. Others now leaned forward with hungry eyes, as if watching history unfold with the urgency of a courtroom about to convict a god. The name Eric Trump had been whispered so many times that it no longer sounded like a person, but a fuse. And Jasmine Crockett was holding the match. She walked back to her seat without notes, without aids, without even a glance toward the screens. She didn't need prompts. What she was about to show had been seared into her mind the moment she saw it. It wasn't hearsay. It wasn't secondhand. It was film. With a silent gesture to the clerk, the chamber lights dimmed. A projector flickered to life. The screen lowered. No sound, no music. Just black and white static. Grainy at first, then stabilizing. A timestamp appeared in the corner. January 4th, 1993. Noi Bai International Airport, Hanoi, Vietnam. The first image showed a Gulfstream 3 taxiing across the rain-damp runway. The resolution was old but sharp enough to distinguish details. The U.S. flag on the tail, a small Tian Hao Enterprises logo, half obscured but unmistakable to anyone who knew where to look. Then the cabin door opened. First out, Ivana Trump, clad in a long overcoat and dark sunglasses. She didn't wave. She moved with practiced precision, like someone trained to walk without leaving footprints. Then came the man beside him, tall, broad-shouldered, military build, uniform beneath civilian garb, and clipped to his breast pocket, a security badge with the rising red star of the People's Liberation Army. The room was dead still. The only sound was the soft whir of the projector. The video froze on a single frame, Ivana Trump stepping down onto the wet tarmac, her right hand brushing the man's arm, his face half turned but visible enough to trigger facial recognition software. Mak Thien Hao, then deputy director of the 2PLA, missing from all official diplomatic records. Jasmine stepped into the center of the room. She didn't have to raise her voice. This footage was recovered from the Vietnamese Civil Aviation Authority archive. It was classified for over 20 years and only recently declassified under the U.S.-Vietnam Digital Records Treaty. She turned slightly toward the camera. This trip does not appear in any White House immigration or foreign travel logs. Ivana Trump's passport records were scrubbed. The manifest of this aircraft, tail number 6GT1HO, was sealed under a national interest waiver. The flight was chartered by a corporate shell in Macau, owned by Thien Hao Group. Trump was still standing. He hadn't sat since the recess ended. Now he looked like a statue built under pressure, still upright but cracking at the joints. Jasmine continued. The visit lasted 48 hours. No diplomatic appointments, no press, no Secret Service record. And yet, 4 weeks after this flight, Ivana Trump quietly checked into St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach, where Eric Trump was born on January 6th. She paused. Not for drama, for gravity. The math is yours to do. Trump exhaled, sharp, fast, involuntary. Jasmine took a step closer. Mr. President, you've made your career off loyalty. Loyalty to country, loyalty to family, loyalty to the truth. But this flight, this footage, this man beside your former wife, it doesn't speak of loyalty. It speaks of secrets. Secrets that now sit beneath a $2.1 billion infrastructure built on falsehood. Trump spoke for the first time in 15 minutes. This is a smear campaign. That flight never happened. My ex-wife took hundreds of private trips. You don't know the context. You're spitting lies from shadows. Jasmine raised her hand, not an interruption, but to hold the weight of what came next. Then tell us, she said, her voice cool as polished steel. Tell this chamber why your wife was on a Thien Hao jet, escorted by a Chinese intelligence officer, on a trip erased from your administration's logs. No response. I'll remind you, sir, she added, that this chamber is not a rally. This is a tribunal, and the American people are watching, not to be entertained, but to be informed. She turned back to the screen. The video now showed the man placing his hand gently on Ivana's lower back as they descended the stairs. A brief contact, a gesture not of diplomacy, but of intimacy. Jasmine's voice dropped a register. That is not foreign policy. That is personal history, buried, disguised, and sold to the American people as patriotism. She walked back to her seat and, without looking at him, said, 3 cuts: bloodline, money, history. Then she sat, and for the first time all day, the president sat too. But not by choice. He collapsed into his chair like a dam surrendering to pressure it could no longer hold. There was a silence after that, a silence too heavy to be called quiet, too wired to be called calm. It was the kind of stillness that comes just before a crack splits through stone. And then it happened. The president slammed both palms on the table. The sound thundered through the chamber like a gunshot. Papers lifted, pens jumped, heartbeats skipped. You bitch, he roared. His voice wasn't political. It wasn't composed. It wasn't even human in its calculation. It was raw, broken fury. He stood again, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face flushed purple, his lips curled, his fingers stabbed the air like a spear. All of you, every single one of you, you're garbage. You're parasites. You feed on real power because you'll never have it. You don't ask questions. You plant bombs. This isn't justice. This is a lynching. He turned full body toward the congressional panel, then toward the media gallery, then toward the camera. Spit hit the mic. His eyes darted like a cornered animal's. They rigged it all. They've been coming for me since day one. Obama, Hillary, the FBI, your fake-ass woke mob, your fake facts. Every one of you is a fraud. Jaws dropped, hands covered mouths. One of the interns in the front row looked down, visibly trembling. The chairman pounded the gavel once, then twice, then gave up entirely. Order wasn't just broken, it was incinerated. And Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't reach for any gavel or escort or protocol. She just looked up, slowly, quietly, with the kind of stillness that can drown fire. And she stared straight into the nearest camera lens, her gaze cold enough to chill satellites. Then she said it. "Fuck you, Trump." No one breathed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was not wild. It was not theatrical. It was controlled, perfectly pitched, calm in a way that made it more terrifying than a scream. She said it like a surgeon says scalpel. "I'm not afraid of you," she continued, never breaking eye contact with the camera. "I never was. But you," she pointed now, directly at the camera, not the man. "You should be terrified of the people watching this from their living rooms, from their tubs, from their hospital beds, from classrooms, airports, sidewalks, because they finally see you." Trump shook his head in disbelief, mouthing a curse that didn't quite land. He tried to speak again, but the mic was already fading under her voice. "They see past the flags and the rallies and the fake gold and the broken promises," she said. "They see what's left when the lies rot away. And what's left, Mr. President, is not power." She stood again now, rising like something elemental. "What's left is a man so desperate to protect the myth of his name, he let it be bought, weaponized and sold, by a country he swore to fight." Trump's hand trembled. Just slightly. Enough. Jasmine turned, eyes never leaving the camera. "I've spent my life fighting to be heard in rooms like this, and I never once raised my voice to do it. But today, I raised my sword." She stepped away from the mic, not storming off, not slamming anything, just stepping back, deliberate, steady, the kind of exit only delivered by someone who knew she had won before the final blow even landed. The entire room remained suspended in silence. The weight of what had just been said hung not in the air, but in history. Then someone exhaled, then another. Then the chairman of the panel, visibly shaken, adjusted his glasses and reached for the gavel with slow, stunned fingers. He looked at Jasmine, then at Trump, then at the documents spread like open wounds across the table. He cleared his throat. "This chamber will now recess until further notice." But no one moved, because in that instant, the real verdict had already been delivered. Not by a court, not by a vote, not by a law, but by one sentence, cut deep into the spine of a presidency. "Fuck you, Trump." The echo of her words had barely settled when something rare, something historic, happened. 4 Republican senators rose from their seats. Hawthorne, Blake, Myers, Ortega, once his defenders, once his echo chamber. Now silent shadows peeling away from the corpse of empire. They didn't slam desks. They didn't offer rebuttals. They didn't mutter justifications to reporters or issue dramatic exits. They simply stood, adjusted their jackets, and walked out of the chamber, one by one, not in protest, in surrender. Trump turned towards them, disbelieving. "Where the hell are you going?" he barked, voice raw from the shouting match minutes earlier. "You don't leave me. I made you." The 4 kept walking. He stepped forward now, away from his desk, his voice growing louder with each word, cracking. "I'm still the President of the United States." No one turned. "You hear me? I'm the one in power. I built your careers. I put your names on ballots. You owe me everything." They disappeared through the chamber doors without a word. Pause. And that silence, that clean, surgical silence, wasn't absence. It was indictment. Trump's voice dropped to a growl. "If anyone brings a vote of no confidence, I swear to God, you'll be finished. All of you." He pounded the desk with the base of his fist. You want to burn this party down? You'll burn with it. The room did not move, not because they feared him, because they didn't. For the first time, his fury landed like static on dead air. Loud, yes, but powerless. The kind of sound a man makes when he realizes he's already been abandoned. Jasmine remained seated, watching, unmoved. She didn't gloat. She didn't interrupt. She just witnessed. Trump's chest rose and fell unevenly. He looked to the chairman, to his remaining allies, to the cameras, to the backs of those who left. And suddenly all that bravado cracked, not in volume but in stillness. His hands dropped from the podium, his shoulders sagged. I gave everything to this country, he muttered under his breath. My name, my blood. But the sentence trailed off like a faulty broadcast signal. A moment later, a young staffer stepped briskly into the chamber, approached the chair, and whispered something into his ear. A sealed memo was passed to the desk, stamped urgent, NatSec Intel. The chairman read it, blinked slowly, and looked across the room like a man tasting smoke before seeing the flames. He cleared his throat. The Senate Intelligence Committee, he said evenly, has just voted to suspend the president's access to all classified briefings, pending national security review. The words hit the room like an earthquake under velvet. Trump's head snapped toward the chairman. You what? The chairman didn't flinch. He just set the memo down and nodded once, like a man acknowledging that a clock had struck its hour. Trump's lips parted, but the words didn't come, because even he, especially he, understood what that meant. This wasn't censure. This wasn't ceremony. This was the first slice into real power. He staggered back one step, then another, and then he sat, no longer in fury, not in command, not in protest. He sat because the weight finally won. A silence fell again, but this time it wasn't waiting for Jasmine to speak. It was waiting for the entire system to catch up to her. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The evidence lay spread like wreckage on the table in front of them. Birth certificates, money trails, black and white stills from a tarmac that never existed on record. And the president, who just an hour ago held the room by the throat, now looked like a man studying his own obituary. In that moment, Trump understood the truth Jasmine had known from the beginning. The sword wasn't in her hand anymore. It was in his chest, and no one was rushing to pull it out. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It wasn't rest. It was the kind of silence that comes after an earthquake, when everything still stands, but nothing is truly intact. Then, the door opened. It was the main door to the chamber, not the staff entrance, not the side hallway where aides came and went. No warning, no clearance request, just the creak of reinforced wood swinging inward. Heads turned, and into the room stepped a man every camera operator instinctively followed. Broad frame, ash-gray suit, deep-set eyes that had seen 1,000 briefings and survived 1,000 political fires. He moved not like a visitor, but like someone who had already lived in every room that mattered in Washington. Martin Kessler, White House Chief of Staff, right hand of the president, the architect of Trump's inner circle, a man whose loyalty had never been questioned, because it had never even once wavered. Until now. He walked with grim purpose down the center aisle. Trump lifted his head slightly, confusion flickering behind the exhaustion. Jasmine didn't move. Neither did the chair. Kessler reached the witness table, stopped in front of Jasmine Crockett, and placed a thick leather-bound folder on the desk between them. The room leaned in. No flourish, no speech, just a sentence. This is the internal White House visitor log from 2015 to the present, he said. It documents every meeting, official or otherwise, between the president and a man referred to in code as the East Friend. Gasps, audible now, sharp, unfiltered disbelief. Kessler didn't blink. He placed a second envelope, sealed, marked eyes only, on top of the logbook. This contains handwritten notes from 3 national security briefings, he added, which the president ordered to be redacted from official transcripts. All 3 contain references to foreign asset conversations occurring off-site, always after visits from the same individual. Trump sat up now, panic crawling into his posture like an invasive species. Kessler, he croaked. Martin, what the hell are you doing? The chief of staff turned to him slowly, face carved from stone. What you should have done, Mr. President, he said, telling the truth. Trump started to rise, but the chair slammed the gavel, not to call order, but to signal transition. Whatever this chamber had been before, debate, committee, protocol, it was now something else. It was a tribunal. A reckoning with receipts. Jasmine opened the logbook with solemn hands, not as a political figure, but as a reader of secrets long buried. The pages were meticulous, typed, time-stamped, cross-referenced with internal surveillance logs. 10 meetings over 9 years, always under classified cover, always labeled as informal, always with a foreign national, Mach Thien Hao, sometimes listed under aliases, Hao T, sometimes simply guest read, and always logged with the security clearance override signed by the president himself. Jasmine read aloud one line, dated June 17, 2019. Private discussion with guest read in Roosevelt Room. Duration, 1 hour, 12 minutes. Topic, unspecified, no staff present. Log recorded post-meeting under Level 4 authorization. She looked up. You had meetings with a former foreign intelligence officer in one of the most secure rooms in the free world, with no oversight and no record of content, just patterns. Trump's voice broke. You think these are real? You think this is truth? He's been compromised. Kessler's been compromised. But the room didn't move, because the room no longer listened to the president's voice as gospel. Not after Jasmine's 3 cuts, not after the senators walked out, and not after the man who built the castle dropped the drawbridge from the inside. Kessler reached into his pocket, pulled a small voice recorder, set it on the table, clicked play. Trump's voice, crisp, unmistakable, filled the chamber. I don't care what Treasury says. We'll reroute through Macau. Just get it done before the audit. How knows people? The room imploded in silence again. But this time, it wasn't Jasmine's silence. It was the end of denial. Jasmine leaned forward. Her voice wasn't loud. It was barely more than a breath. This chamber isn't listening anymore, she said. It's remembering. And for the first time in his life, Donald Trump looked around a room and found no allies. Not one. He was surrounded by cameras, history, and the ruins of his own fortress. And across from him stood a woman who never raised her voice, only her standard. The truth no longer needed a sword. It had a witness, and the fortress was now a courtroom. The air was heavy with revelation. Not shock anymore. Not even anger. Just the gravitational pull of inevitability of a nation watching the last pillar fall. Jasmine Crockett sat in stillness, her presence no longer political but judicial. Her words weren't coming from a microphone. They were now coming from evidence. She opened one final envelope, white, unmarked, only a seal on its lip, red wax with the insignia of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. She laid the contents gently on the desk, as if placing a verdict upon an altar. Then she looked up. This, she said, her voice as soft as a storm cloud, is a certified document from the United States Federal Court, verified and notarized on July 14, 2025. Her hand hovered above the page for a second, not for effect, but for breath. It is the result of a court-ordered DNA analysis between Donald J. Trump and Eric Frederick Trump, conducted under federal supervision, with chain of custody documentation and biometric control. Trump didn't move. His jaw was set. His hands were folded tightly in his lap. The skin at his neck flushed, then paled. But he made no sound. Jasmine read the sentence. Conclusion. No biological relation found between Donald John Trump and Eric Frederick Trump. Then silence. Not a gasp, not a stir, just the slow, inevitable sound of air leaving a myth. The screen behind her shifted to a split view. On the left, the test result. On the right, a full, unblinking close-up of the president's face. And for the first time in his political life, he had no performance left. No counterpunch, no insult, no pivot. He stared at the document as if it had just whispered something in a language only he could hear. His mouth parted slightly, then closed. But it was his eyes that betrayed him. Because he didn't look surprised. He looked relieved, then resentful, then, worst of all, resigned. And the nation saw it, all of it. From Maine to Mississippi, living rooms were still, screens were paused, coffee mugs halfway to lips, phones forgotten in palms. Everyone watching, left or right, red or blue, knew the same thing he had known all along. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't grin. She simply looked down at the paper again and folded it once, with the kind of reverence one might reserve for a death certificate. She spoke without venom. You built your empire on the image of family, of strength, of legacy, but you knew the truth. You buried it. You called it strategy, loyalty, optics. She looked up again. Her voice didn't shake. It carried. But what you really built was a lie so large it became a nation's inheritance. And today, America returns it. Trump opened his mouth. No words came. His fingers tightened against his thighs. The chair asked softly, "Mr. President, would you like to respond for the word?" Trump's lips twitched. His voice, when it came, was smaller than it had ever been. "I did what I had to do." Jasmine stood. "And that," she said, "is why this isn't just your downfall. It's your confession." The camera zoomed in one final time, not on her, but on him. He wasn't weeping, he wasn't raging, he was empty. And emptiness, the country understood now, was all that had ever been holding the myth together. The final cut had been made, and there was no flesh left to bleed. Donald Trump stood, not with fury, not with fire, not with the swagger that had defined 1,000 rallies and 3 presidential campaigns. He stood like a man waking from a long dream and finding the room unfamiliar. The desk before him, once a throne of intimidation, now looked like a tombstone. For a full 5 seconds, he simply stood there, hands at his sides, eyes glazed, lips parted as if still expecting a script to appear in front of him. But no teleprompter blinked. No aide whispered a line. No flag waved behind him. And so, for the first time in his public life, Donald Trump walked without applause. He stepped away from the chair slowly, one foot, then the next, the movement robotic, stripped of confidence or certainty. His shoes clicked against the marble floor like coffin nails. He didn't speak. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't turn back. And as he passed through the chamber doors, there was no escort, no announcement, no anthem. He simply left. Behind him, the room did not erupt. It did not sigh. It did not cheer, but it stood. One by one, quietly, solemnly, every member of the chamber rose to their feet, not out of honor, not out of respect, but out of recognition that something enormous, something grotesque and godlike, had finally collapsed. They stood the way a town might stand at the edge of a smoking crater, not for ceremony, but because to remain seated would be to deny that the war was over. The chair didn't bang the gavel. There was no need. The silence had already spoken louder than law. Jasmine remained seated the longest. She watched Trump go without blinking, without turning to the cameras, without letting a single emotion slip from her jaw. She didn't chase him. She didn't bask in the moment. She just breathed in and out, as if finally, after carrying years of truth unspoken, she was allowed to fill her lungs without pressure. Then she rose, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the same quiet strength that had carried her through every word, every cut, every page laid bare before the world. She gathered her folders, folded her pen, straightened her jacket, and stepped back from the desk. Around her, no one said a word. Not the chair, not the clerks, not the former loyalists. Even the cameras, still blinking red, felt less intrusive, like they too understood that this was not television. This was history. Outside the chamber doors, the sounds of Washington had changed. No chants, no sirens, just distant murmurs, the rustle of flags, the shifting of a nation exhaling all at once. Trump was gone. Not by impeachment, not by resignation, but by something older, something final, truth. He had been unseated by a proof, not process. And as Jasmine stepped through the same doors he had exited only moments earlier, she felt no thrill, no triumph, only weight. Not the weight of power, but of responsibility. The kind of weight that doesn't lift after victory, but deepens with consequence. Behind her, the chamber remained standing, because some things, when they fall, demand the world remain on its feet to watch them hit the ground. And that day, Donald Trump didn't fall with fire. He fell with silence. But even after he left, even after the chamber emptied, the air did not shift. It held, as if the room itself still refused to move until it understood what it had just witnessed. And in the center of that silence, at the very table where power had just died, sat the woman who never raised her voice, only her truth. Jasmine Crockett hadn't moved. She remained in her chair long after the chair had adjourned, long after the aides had filed out, long after the last gavel strike echoed down the marbled halls of the Capitol like a final heartbeat. Her hands were folded in front of her shoulders still, not slumped. Her expression unreadable, not cold, not proud, but distant, as though her soul were staring at something far beyond the chamber walls. The television crews knew better than to cut away. And so the camera stayed, zoomed in, steady, focused not on the table, not on the flag, not on the exits, but on her. And somewhere in a network control room buried beneath Manhattan's concrete towers, a senior anchor removed his earpiece and whispered into the silence around him, "She just took down a sitting president. Live." Producers didn't cut to commercial. Directors didn't fade to graphics, because they understood what millions of viewers were beginning to feel in their stomachs, in their throats, in their chests. This wasn't a political event. This was a turning point. And the woman at the center of it wasn't basking in the moment. She was becoming it. From Los Angeles to Lansing, from Miami to Minneapolis, televisions cast her image across kitchen walls, dorm rooms, offices, gas stations, and prisons. Her name no longer needed a party affiliation. Her face no longer needed an introduction. She had spoken softly, carried no title beyond her seat, and yet she had stood longer, cut deeper, and stood stillest after the storm. And the world saw it. Cameras caught the way her fingers slowly unfurled from each other, the way her eyes drifted downward, as if measuring the emotional cost of the day, the way her shoulders didn't sag but settled, like a soldier removing armor that had been fused to skin. Still no words, still no motion. She did not check her phone. She did not look for press. She did not rise to accept applause that didn't come, because applause would have trivialized what she had just done. Instead, she closed the last folder on the table. One hand, no drama. And when she finally stood, the camera didn't pan, it held. Because America wasn't watching a politician anymore. They were watching something being rewritten. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But in her stillness, the country felt something holy, not religious, but righteous. That justice, when finally unchained, didn't have to roar. It only had to stand its ground. And that's what she had done. She stood when others ran. She spoke when others spun. She stayed when the empire emptied. And when history asked who remained in the room after the myth bled out, only Jasmine Crockett, the woman still standing. Outside, the skies open. Rain fell on Washington like the breaking of a fever, furious, cold, relentless. It slammed against the dome of the Capitol, washed down its marble steps, pooled along the foot of statues that had stood for generations. The city, always loud, always grinding, now sounded like breath, drawn in, held tight, and shaken loose. Inside the chamber, not a single person moved. No shuffling papers, no coughing, no whispering aides. The hearing was adjourned, the room was cleared, the president was gone. The evidence was delivered, the last folder closed, And still no one left. They stayed not out of confusion, but reverence, as if the walls themselves had witnessed something they couldn't let go. The overhead lights hummed like spotlights that no longer searched for drama, but simply refused to look away. Jasmine stood where she'd risen minutes earlier, hands resting lightly on the table, shoulders level, gaze lowered not in exhaustion, but in awareness. She knew what she had done, and she knew what was coming. The next hours would bring analysis, outrage, vindication, threats, tributes. Commentators would swarm, networks would spin, protests would rise, and fractures would deepen. But this moment, still belonged to her. Not because she claimed it, but because no one else could. The microphone in front of her still blinked red, live, uncut. And that's when she reached forward, pressed a single fingertip to its base, and spoke her final words. Not to Trump, not to the committee, but to the country itself. Her voice was soft, but the room caught it. The walls absorbed it. The world held its breath again. "We don't need weapons," she said. "We only need truth and a microphone that's turned on." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was holy, because somehow that one sentence, simple, undramatic, unscripted, cut through every headline, every scandal, every distortion that had led the nation here. It said, "We are done fighting lies with silence. We are done kneeling to noise. We are done pretending that truth needs armor or blood or permission. All it needs is to be heard." A pause, she stepped back. She didn't turn off the mic. She left it on, letting the hiss of air hum into every television, phone, tablet, and laptop across the nation, like static truth filling a vacuum. One by one, those still seated in the chamber rose again, but this time not for Trump, not for tradition. They stood because something inside them knew that a threshold had been crossed. And once crossed, a republic does not return the same. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, history burned, not in case, but clarity. Jasmine turned and walked down the aisle. No music played, no anthem blared. Only rain, only footsteps, only memory etching itself into marble and into the marrow of a nation that had just watched power fall, not with a scream, not with a shot, but with a sentence. And somewhere deep inside the Capitol walls, the ghosts of old truths stirred, not to haunt, but to bear witness, because the Republic hadn't ended, it had ignited. In the end, it wasn't rage that changed the world. It was one woman speaking the truth, calmly, clearly, when no one else dared. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay in your seat, hold your ground, and refuse to lie. And if that truth reaches even one honest heart, then history has already begun to heal. If this story left something burning in your chest, don't walk away from it. Sit with it. Question it. Carry it. Share it with someone who still believes quiet voices can split empires. Comment, reflect, and send it to the one friend who's never been afraid to speak first. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth doesn't wait for permission. Tap the bell, because what comes next isn't comfort. It's confrontation, and it just might change what you expect from power. This is a fictional dramatization built on real silences, real systems, and real courage. Any resemblance to real people or events is unintentional, or a mirror we're not ready to look into. Thanks for watching. Truth doesn't echo unless someone speaks it. This is Harrison Stories.